Hello, it's Randi Rhodes. Here's a clip from our show, and go to randyrhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.
Mary had a little man.
The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show. Turn up.
He stopped the car and he parked his car in between the dumpster and the back of the restaurant where there were no lights. The area was dark and it was deserted. I was alarmed and I immediately asked him what he was doing. Instead of answering my questions, Mr. Moore reached over and began groping me and putting his hands on my breast. I tried to open my car door to leave, but he reached over and he locked it so I could not get out. I tried fighting him off while yelling at him to stop. But instead of stopping, he began squeezing my neck, attempting to force my head onto his crotch.
I hate that.
I continued to struggle. I was determined that I was not going to allow him to force me to have sex with him. I was terrified. He was also trying to pull my shirt off. I thought that he was going to rape me. I was twisting, and I was struggling, and I was begging him to stop. I had tears running down my face. At some point, he gave up. And he then looked at me and he told me, he said, "You're just a child." And he said, "I am the district attorney of Etowah County. And if you tell anyone about this, no one will ever believe you."
And apparently that is true for a good chunk of the Republican Party. Nobody will ever believe her because where they sit is where they stand, meaning they have no principles. If they have an R after their name, then no matter what the accusation is, no matter what the number of women or the number of facts that are presented that show you to be corrupt or a rapist or a pedophile or a sexual assaulter or a Chester the molester or somebody that trolls them all. It doesn't matter as long as there's an R after. You won't even believe what some of these people on the TV have the nerve to say out loud. This is an Alabama journalist. His name's Brandon Mosley. This is so vile that I almost didn't want to play it because there are women in this audience who are still traumatized by stuff that's happened. I just want you guys to know you're not alone. This has happened to 1 in 4 women in this country, okay? And nobody wanted to talk about it for the longest time. And now it seems like the time to talk about it in this way. Other women have come forward and they are putting truth to the lie that you're alone and it only happened to you and it's your fault. Maybe the way you dressed or the way you walked or the way you talked, or you were 12 or you were 14. You didn't make good decisions because you were young. This is all stupid. This is all just so stupid. But here's an Alabama supporter of Roy Moore's and a journalist, no less, named Brandon Mosley, who's going to sit there and tell Brooke Baldwin on the CNN that this is no more severe than stealing a lawnmower.
Just so everyone's on the same page, sexual consent in Alabama is 16, and you acknowledge that sexual contact with a 14-year-old would have been illegal and would be considered sexual abuse by the books today. But Brandon, you make this argument that there wasn't a law against sexual abuse in Alabama back in the 70s. So I just want to, let me ask, are you saying that because there wouldn't have been a law, according to you, that would have made it okay back then?
No, I'm not. I mean, if Roy Moore committed a sin,
A sin.
that's a sin and that's not good. But we're not talking about an actual crime here that's prosecutable in 2017. I don't think you throw out 35 years of a man's career and his reputation because of unsubstantiated allegation from 1979.
Brandon,
she
was 14 years of age. And I don't know how much digging you did or didn't do into the law in 1979, but we did, and we found Section 13A 667. We found that this was on the books going back to 77 and would have been considered sexual abuse in the second degree. Care to respond?
Which is a misdemeanor in Alabama.
Does that make it okay?
I'm correct. No. But again, if Roy Moore has stolen a lawnmower when he was 21, that's bad. But that's not a reason 50 years later to all of a sudden, throw him off the ballot or let Mitch McConnell pick the next senator of Alabama.
Sexual abuse, stealing a lawnmower, let's not even go there.
Seriously, dude. I mean, I cannot believe that they compare their children in Alabama to lawnmowers being stolen. They steal the innocence of a young girl. They steal the life of a young girl. They steal, her ability to see the world like somebody who's been unmolested. The way that she'll see men, the way that she'll view relationships, the way that she'll view her own church, the way that she'll view people of, in a position of authority and trust is shattered. But he compares all that loss to stealing a lawnmower. These are some sick people. These are some really troubled individuals. And, the idea that, there wasn't a law in Alabama in 1977 against, the sexual assault of a minor. Of course there was. I mean, they just make stuff up because they just want to support this guy. And that is what they've said out loud repeatedly. Even Mo Brooks, who ran against Roy Moore and lost in the primary, is saying he supports Roy Moore. I would rather have Roy Moore than anybody else. I don't care if he did these things. I mean, you have all these people in Alabama, the entire Alabama Republican Party, the Senate, by the way, the RNC they still have 12 people down in Alabama campaigning for Roy Moore. The Republican National Committee is still supporting Roy Moore. Roy Moore, after hearing that very emotional confession of this woman who has had this in her belly and never told a single soul except for her mother and her husband before she married him. And I know that she told her husband before she married him because she viewed herself as somehow damaged. And she wanted to let him know before he married her that she was somehow damaged, that there was another man who had done this to her in the same county. And so she told a couple of people, right? Roy Moore actually called her a liar.
I want to address what's been brought out on television today by Gloria Allred and a client that she has about things I allegedly did. I want to make it perfectly clear. The people of Alabama know me. They know my character. They know what I've stood for in the political world for over 40 years. And I can tell you without hesitation, this is absolutely false. I never did what she said I did. I don't even know the woman. I don't know anything about her. I don't even know where the restaurant is or was.
Okay, so what she produced as evidence was her high school yearbook. On the day that this all happened to her, Beverly, she happened to bring in her high school yearbook to the restaurant. I believe it was called Hickory Hill House, where she was working as a waitress. And Roy Moore signed it and dated it and signed it Roy Moore DA. District Attorney. Who the hell does that? I mean, that's like me signing my autograph, Randi Rhodes, JD. I mean, like nobody does that. Nobody. But he signed her yearbook back then, and he wrote Roy Moore district attorney, and he wrote, "I couldn't wish to a more beautiful, lovely girl a Merry Christmas. Love, Roy Moore, district attorney." Then he dated it, and then he wrote the name of the restaurant where he signed it. But he doesn't know her, and he doesn't know the restaurant, and he doesn't know her from. I mean, this is just a bald face. And then, all else failing, he shoves his wife, who was like 15, his wife Kayla, Roy Moore's wife, is like 15, 17 years younger than he is.
If you look at this situation, you'll see that because I'm 11 points ahead, 10 or 11 points ahead, this race being just 28 days off.
Okay, he's not 11 points ahead. This is another lie. It's a toss-up, which for me is a throw-up. Okay, this is just grotesque. And if you look at some polls, Doug Jones, the prosecutor, the Democrat, is 4 points ahead of Roy Moore. But in other polls, it's a dead-even race. Where is he getting any of this?
That this is a political maneuver. It has nothing to do with reality. It's all about politics. Now, I'd like to let my wife make a few statements.
I've been married to this man for 32 years.
And I still know nothing about him.
Been together for 33 altogether. He has never one time lifted a finger to me. He is the most gentle, most kind man that I have ever known in my life. He's godly, he's loving, and everybody in this community knows it. These are our church members, these are our family, these are our friends, these are people that know him just like I do.
All right, then. That means they don't know him, because your husband was on a banned list of people that were allowed in the local Gadsden Mall because your husband was a mall rat who trolled for young teenage girls to the point where they had a list of people banned from the mall, and your loving, godly husband was on it. When he was the district attorney and dating you. 33 years we've been together. I know nothing about him. This is unbelievable. He was 34 years old. He was asking 17-year-olds out. He was 32 years old. He was molesting 14-year-olds. He was 34 when he did this to Beverly. Or no, he was 32 when he did this to Beverly and a district attorney in the county. You know, they went down. The reporters, "Oh, Steve Bannon, you are doing such a lousy job of showing us that these things can't be true and blocking additional stories because, look, it's all, you know, there's more and more people coming out, including the people that used to work at the mall as police officers and security guards and managers of the mall and people that worked at the record store. They're all coming out now." Freaking New Yorker has an article that said they went down to Gadsden and they drove around and they didn't see a single yard sign for Roy Moore, the hometown hero. Even in the parking lot of one mall in town that the New Yorker reporter went to, there were more bumper stickers for Luther Strange, he counted 4, and Moore's opponent in the Republican primary for Roy Moore. There was only 1. And then this guy went and started to seek out people who worked at the mall when Roy Moore was on the banned list. The Gadsden Mall apparently opened in 1974. It had a Belk and a Sears as the anchor stores. And on a Saturday night, they said this was the place to be. Parents would drop their teens off, and it was the height of the mall rat years. Okay, it was just starting. And so this reporter from the New Yorker went to talk to some of the people that used to work in the mall. 2 young security guards were making their rounds, and so the reporter stopped him and asked him, "What's it like here at this mall now?" And he said, "Well, it gets rough here on Saturday nights." He mentioned fighting and stealing and gun-toting at the mall. Sounds great. He said, "We still have an active ban list referencing chronic rule breakers not allowed on mall property." And then the security guard volunteers, but it doesn't go back that far. So the reporter said, "What do you mean?" "Oh, the early 80s when Roy Moore was a regular visitor to this mall." Huh? Yeah, they had read the story from Thursday's Washington Post that when Moore was a 32-year-old assistant DA in Etowah County, that he molested this girl Lee Korfman, who was 14 at the time, that he brought her home and sexually molested her, right? So then when Beverly Young Nelson, who came forward yesterday, said that she was assaulted by Roy Moore when she was 16 years old, she presented the high school yearbook that Moore signed right before the alleged assault. The two other girls mentioned in the Washington Post mentioned that they met Roy Moore at the Gadsden Mall. Well, the people at that mall also read that. So the reporter from the New Yorker, after the security guard mentions this, decided that he would contact the police department, he would contact some of the people that worked at the mall, and that is what he did. He said that he spoke to or messaged with more than a dozen people, including a major political figure in the state, who told the reporter that he had heard over the years that Roy Moore had been banned from the mall because he repeatedly badgered teenage girls. And others that he spoke to said that they heard this all the time. And the people that he spoke to included 5 members of the local legal community, 2 cops who worked there, and several people who hung out at the mall in the early 80s, and a number of former mall employees. And several of them asked not to be named, but sources tell me Moore was actually banned from the Gadsden Mall. And remember when I was reading the Washington Post article, I noticed that he had worked also at the YWCA, coaching women's softball. Yeah, he was banned from there too for his inappropriate behavior of soliciting sex from the young girls. Teresa Jones, a deputy district attorney for Etowah County in the early 80s, she told CNN last week, quote, "It was common knowledge that Roy Moore dated high school girls. She told me that she couldn't confirm the alleged mall banning, but said it was a rumor she had heard for years." So they started asking around, like, who used to work at the mall? They talked to a 59-year-old living in East Gadsden who was from 1981 to 1985 an employee at the Record Bar, a store in the Gadsden Mall. By the early 80s, Leggett told me the mall was the place to be. There were no empty stores. Lots of kids came around, lots of teenagers. You went there to see and be seen. He had actually met his wife, Joanne, there. She worked at a restaurant called the Orange Bowl, and she remembers parents dropped their kids off at the mall unchaperoned. Teens filled the place. He said that he saw Roy Moore there a few times. His understanding was that he'd already been banned. He said, quote, "It started around 1979, I think. I know the ban was still in place when I got there." Greg Leggett recalled a Gadsden police officer named J.D. Thomas, now retired, who works security at the mall. J.D. was a fixture there when I was working at the store. He really looked after the kids there. He was a good guy. J.D. told me, "If you see Roy, let me know. He's banned from the mall." He said that his boss, Eddie Hill, also told him, "Look for more." They called these people. There was no answer. Finally, this reporter did get hold of J.D. Thomas, the police officer, and he said, "I don't have anything to say about that." So he wouldn't deny it either. But a former manager of the mall in the late 80s confirmed the existence of a banned list. He says he doesn't remember if Moore was on that list while he was the manager there. Barnes Boyle, an 86-year-old, also managed the mall from 81 to 98. His wife, Brenda, told the reporter that Moore was a longtime acquaintance of his. They went to the YMCA together and that he planned to vote for him and that this is all liberal propaganda. But 2 police officers that this reporter spoke to over the weekend said, Moore's presence at the mall was regarded as a problem. I was told by a girl who worked at the mall he'd been run off from there by a number of the stores.
Clear for takeoff. Randi Rhodes Air Force. Air Force. RandiRhodes.com.
Hey guys, it's Scotty, Randy's producer here, and as many of you know, I grew up in Randy's house. You know, eating her food, watching her TV, and like most kids, ignorantly not following her advice. And one of her biggest pieces of advice was, never take a job in radio, because the big companies that run radio, they suck. Well, I didn't listen and ended up working in radio, and as always, Randy was right, they sucked. But I'm here now, and I can tell you that it takes a lot of chutzpah to break away from the big companies and start your own show. But you know what else it takes? Your support. We are independent media, so the only financial backers we have are you, the best listeners in the world. And we can't do it without you. So please, go to randyrhodes.com and support the show, buy a stinking podcast, donate some money, and keep us going.
Hey, I need to tell you something about Herky Jerky, because over the past year, you've been asking me to ask Jason from Herky Jerky if they will ever produce a turkey jerky. Well, I'm proud to tell you that he says absolutely yes. And not only does he have it now, it's absolutely spectacular. Let me start with the taste. It is extremely soft and slightly sweet, and it's bite-sized pieces that taste just like the homemade oven-roasted turkey that you have on Thanksgiving. It's made from turkeys raised without added hormones and just the right amount of salt, natural smoke flavoring, and spices that will make your taste buds go wild. And you asked for healthy. Well, Herky Jerky Turkey Jerky has no nitrates, preservatives, MSG, or artificial ingredients, absolutely zero fat, and packs a whopping 11 grams of protein per serving, and very low in cholesterol. Quite simply, I think this is one of the healthiest and best tasting high protein snacks you can get. And for the whole month of November, $5 off any turkey jerky pack you desire. $5 off, just use promo code TURKEY. They don't sell the little dinky bags that you get at the gas station. They're 14-ounce zip-sealed packs, and they're meant to last. Herky Jerky, making quality jerky and meat snacks for almost 25 years. Gotta tell you, I believe this is as good as anything I've ever tasted and the best thing they've ever produced. Try some today, herkyjerky.com.
This is Sam from Indivisible. Be part of the resistance. Listen to the Indivisible podcast when you want, on demand at progressivevoices.com or on the PV app. Download the PV app now in the app and Android stores.
Take action and hold Congress accountable. This is Ezra Levin on the Progressive Voices Network, asking you to join the millions who decided to become part of the movement to resist Trump's agenda. Check out indivisibleguide.com to start resisting on your home turf. Keep listening for more ways you can get involved.
Be part of the resistance. Make sure you listen to this week's new Indivisible podcast, available on demand at progressivevoices.com or on the PV app.
This is the voice of the resistance. You're listening to the Progressive Voices Network. The Randi Rhodes Show is live on randyrhodes.com and the free Progressive Voices app for Android and iOS. Visit the App Store or progressivevoices.com now.
I'm a lifelong Republican, but I just can't do it.
I can't vote for Roy Moore.
He's already been removed from office twice.
This time it's even worse.
You read the story and it just shakes you. Just awful.
I just don't trust him.
He's too divisive. Don't decency and integrity matter anymore?
No.
I'm a Republican, but Roy Moore, no way.
I'm for Doug Jones.
Yay.
I'm another Republican for Doug Jones.
I'm Doug Jones, and I approve this message.
Hey, Doug, congratulations. I think you just won a seat in the Senate from Alabama. Oh, my God. This is just an amazing story. So the two officers that the reporter from the New Yorker spoke to this weekend, both of whom didn't want to put their names out there, said that they have long heard stories about Moore and the mall. Quote, general knowledge at the time when I moved here was that this guy is a lawyer cruising the mall for high school dates. The legal age of consent in Alabama is 16, so it would not be illegal there for a man in his early 30s to date a girl who was, say, a senior in high school. But these officers, along with other people I spoke to, said that Moore's presence at the mall was regarded as a problem. Quote, I was told by a girl who worked at the mall that he'd been run off from there from a number of stores, maybe not legally banned, but run off, one officer told me. He also said, I heard from one girl who had to tell the manager of a store at the mall to get Roy Moore to leave her alone. The second officer went further, quote, A friend of mine told me he was banned from there. I actually voted for Moore. I liked him at one time, but I'm basically disgusted now, to be honest with you. Some of the things he said recently, I've changed my tune completely about this guy. He said, when I heard what he said on Hannity the other night, referring to Roy Moore being on Sean Hannity and Sean Hannity telling him, so what, and losing 1 million sponsors, Hubble Contacts, HelloFresh, Keurig, all these sponsors. He said, when I heard him on Sean Hannity's radio show last Friday, I almost stood straight up. The thing about how he's never dated anybody without their mother's permission, that appalled me. That made me want to throw up. Why would you need someone's permission to date somebody? I'm probably going to write in Luther Strange. Roy Moore has since said that he's got a special concern for the protection of young ladies, and said he doesn't know Miss Korfman from anybody. He doesn't know Beverly from anybody. He doesn't know any of these girls from anybody. I've never talked to them, never had contact with them, except to sign her yearbook the night that you took her out back behind a dumpster and tried to force her to toil under your belly. Carrie in Dallas. May I help you? How may I direct your call? Melanie in Albany.
Yes. Hi, Randy.
Hi.
This is Melanie.
Hi.
I just wanted to comment just quickly about this woman, Beverly.
Yeah.
I believe her.
I do
100%. And
what in the world would she have to gain by...
Right. Yeah.
I mean, by doing...
My heart hurts for her. That being said, she says later in that interview that she voted for Donald Trump.
Yeah, she does.
And I'm like, I don't get it. 16 women, including a girl claiming to have been raped at 13 by Donald Trump, came out and basically said what you're saying about Roy Moore. But voting for him was okay. Why? Because it didn't affect you personally? I just get tired with this inability of people to empathize with what someone else may be going through. And this woman, by every means, could empathize, having had that experience with Roy Moore. But she was willing to vote this other sexual predator into the White House. I just don't get it.
It's hard to reconcile, but it seems to me that there is still at this age, she's obviously a woman in her 50s, so am I. And honest to God, man, there is so much peer pressure in this weird little culture of evangelical Southern Christians that has got to be exposed and disposed of, because women have been told for such a long time that it's their fault, and they internalize that, and I think she's probably one of those who said, hey, what happened to me because I allowed it to happen. I shouldn't have, and
I made a poor choice.
Yeah, made a poor choice. I shouldn't have been where I was. I shouldn't have gotten into his car. I shouldn't have,
Right.
And all this peer pressure has played a part in her life ever since this happened to keep her quiet, number one, for all these years, and number two, to vote for somebody because everyone else says that that's what they're going to do, and that if you don't do it, there's something wrong with you, and you don't fit in here anymore. Right.
Yeah. All right, I just kind of wanted to hear your hit.
There's a good article for you to read today in the Washington. It's not actually an article. It's a recounting of her own personal experience by a woman who writes books. She's like a ghostwriter for people like the Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clark, and she helped she co-wrote Sarah Palin's autobiography and all that. Her name's Nancy French, and she's got a little piece, it's only like 2 pages long, called What It's Like to Watch Men Like Roy Moore as a Conservative and as a Sex Abuse Survivor. And it's very interesting how she talks about, she was molested when she was 12 years old by her own pastor, her own preacher. Yeah, and she says, she felt special because he picked her out of all the girls.
Right.
Right. And it's not until, all of a sudden late, now, when all these women who are very courageous, and you got to remember this too, the women who came out about Harvey Weinstein, the women who came out about Louis C.K., these are women who are, kind of celebrities or have lawyers or have the means to fight, or, nothing terrible is going to, their careers are already made. And when it was happening, they didn't say anything because they were afraid their careers would be ruined.
Yeah.
So can you imagine being a 12-year-old girl, 14-year-old girl, 16-year-old girl in one of these rural places where the person is a person of authority and somebody that you probably respect in your life, where your parents probably respect that person. He was a DA or he was your preacher, and and
he's a good catch.
Yeah,
remember?
he's a good catch, right?
Yeah.
And so you internalize it and you say, well, I did something wrong, and so I'm not going to do that wrong thing again. And if the people around me are telling me that I have to vote for Donald Trump, then I'm going to do that.
Yeah, I hear you. And what was that woman's name again? I want to write it down.
Nancy French.
Nancy French. Okay. Well, thank you, Randy.
You're welcome.
You have a good day.
I'm going to read it to you because it's really not very long. It's very short, actually. She said, I used to admire men like Roy Moore because I loved everything about church. The off-key a cappella rendition of Onward Christian Soldiers, the typos in the bulletins, the ladies who smelled like Aquanet with little round rouge circles on their cheeks, and yes, men like Moore who said long prayers and ran the show. That changed one hot summer day when I needed a ride home from Vacation Bible School. I was delighted when the preacher volunteered to drop me off. As we drove, I chatted incessantly, happy to have him all to myself without people trying to get his attention in the church parking lot. And when we got to my house, I was shocked that he walked me inside my dark house, and even more surprised when he lingered in conversation, and thunderstruck when he kissed me right on the lips. This next sentence is going to surprise a lot of people. At 12 years old, I swooned over my good luck. He picked me out of all the girls at church. But the relationship, especially after he moved on, reset my moral compass. If all the church conversation about morality and sexual purity was a lie, what else was fake? Now that the family of God felt incestuous, I rejected the church and myself. Didn't I want the preacher's attention? Didn't I cause this? When I careened from faith, I made a series of poor romantic decisions that later almost cost me my life. Still, I couldn't very well criticize the church because I was an utter emotional mess. On Thursday, all this came back to me after I read one sentence in the Washington Post. The article was about allegations that Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore sexually touched a teenager when he was in his 30s. A sentence from Lee Korfman, who was 14 at the time, jumped out at me. Quote, I felt responsible, she said. I swallowed back tears as I read the rest. I felt like I had done something bad, and it kind of set the course for me doing other things that were bad. After her life spiraled with drinking, drugs, boyfriends, she attempted suicide 2 years later. In fact, she didn't come forward earlier because she worried that her 3 divorces and poor financial history would make people doubt her story. One thing that 2017 has given us a clearer picture of who's targeted for sexual abuse and what it does to victims. An anonymous man who alleged that Kevin Spacey attempted to rape him as a child also explained that he'd been the victim of an incestuous relationship with an adult cousin. Formerly aspiring actress Lucia Evans said her abuse by Harvey Weinstein caused eating problems. Quote, I ruined several really good relationships because of this, she said. My schoolwork definitely suffered, and my roommates thought I was going to kill myself. The evil of sexual predators is that they attack the weak and make them weaker, then discredit them because of their weakness. These arrogant monsters go on to bigger and better things, leaving a collection of wounded people in their wake. But these victims, one by one, are coming forward anyway, well aware that they'll be mocked and disbelieved, well aware that some will scrutinize their lives more harshly than their predators' lives. I'm not an angel, Korfman pointed out. Moore, on the other hand, repeatedly claimed to be God's warrior. However, the scripture he really needed to read wasn't one of the 10 Commandments he so desperately wanted to hang on into the state courthouse. It was Luke 17:2, which warns, quote, "It would be better for them to be thrown into the sea with a millstone tied around their neck than to cause one of these little ones to stumble." The great thing about 2017 is seeing these victims standing up straight, no longer stumbling. May we also see justice prevail for the predators this side of heaven. On November 13, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell called on Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore to step aside after women accused him of sexual misconduct. "I believe the women," McConnell said. Moore denied the allegations. That's Nancy French trying to tell you how these people prey on the weakest, and then when the weakest are weak, they mock them for being weak. When they do find courage and strength and they come forward, it's either too late or it took them too long to stop being so weak, or to find their own strength in other women, or to find their own strength in an environment now that is encouraging of these women to come forward. To tell at least other women you're not alone, you know, that you don't have to suffer through this, that this is not okay. And Nancy French is a 4-time New York Times best-selling author. She has written books with former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin, Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clark, Olympic gold medalist Shawn Johnson, Sean Lowe, a television personality, and other. And she's trying to tell you how this all happens and what happens to you. And it does last a lifetime. This is the gift that keeps on giving until you give it back. And that is why, regardless of who wins this Alabama primary, like I said, this is apparently a story from Alabama, not in Alabama for some people. There are numerous articles today about how some Christians encourage this behavior because they want to get rid of the daughters and keep the sons around to help out. But the daughters have to go and get married right away. They have to unload them. They have to offload them. I mean, it's so sick. .com for the whole thing in a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.